G'day everybody, Two Ordinary Cops, back again. Schultzy.
Yeah,
G'day,
mate.
mate.
How are you? It's been a pretty busy week, but mate, I believe you've just been tripping around a bit, and you're finally back home.
Yeah, back home, and it's funny, like people are going home and have a rest. It's like bullshit. I live on a farm, mate. There's no rest. The rest is going away for work. So no, I'm back, mate. Just catching up on a few jobs, and we're very dry. New England, I know there's a lot of water everywhere around Australia. You know, certain places more than they want, but shit, we need water. It's the driest. Bit a little completely nothing to do with the podcast, but it's the driest beginning to a year that this area has had since 1940, which was when records that my family have began. So never
Wow.
before has there been so little rain at the beginning of a year. So anyway, I'll
Yep.
take my police hat off, put my firefighter hat on, and go shit. Anyway, so
Yeah.
there we go. Yeah,
Yeah, mate. And mate, so to kick this one off, we got something else we're going to talk about, but to kick this one off, we both realised after listening to our recording last week, we spoke about the arrest, but didn't actually then go into details of it, which you said later on, mate. So do you want to just kick off with that? So that's the arrest of Ben Robert Smith
yeah.
at the Sydney airport. For
Yeah,
everybody.
so the reason I wanted to cover this is because this is the major thing that police have an influence in. So, out of everything else, it's all about the treatment of the courts and the investigation and the government ordered the investigation, whatever else. That's all outside of police control. And listen, I don't criticise individual police. I'm happy to criticise police forces, absolutely.
Yeah.
If a copper massively fucks up, I'm absolutely happy to criticise individual acts and whatever else. But generally speaking, we're very supportive of the police. Now, having worked in the Northern Territory for 15 years as a copper and arrested thousands of people, as you have, as everyone else did, it's not no one keeps record. It's just part of the job.
Yeah.
But there are general orders and ways that arrests occur. People in the public probably don't understand this. Arrest is an act of last resort. And quite often only brought about when you can't assure the person's. So I'll go through the general order a bit, and forgive me because it's been a minute. So, but basically, the reason you arrest is because the immediacy of the offence, like the offence is occurring, so you stop the offence by arresting the offender. You need to ensure that person's appearance before a court, and you can't do it any other way. So, the person's done something, you need to get them before the court. You arrest them. You want to put them on bail conditions, so that there can be conditions that you want that you might think that they're going to get bail. And to bail, the definition of bail is to be at liberty instead of in custody. That's all that is. And you can put conditions on their being at liberty instead of in custody. So the reason you might arrest somebody is to put those conditions on them before granting them bail after they've been charged with an offence. There's lots of different rules. Okay. So bring it back to Ben Robert Smith. He's being charged, and the allegations are from, we're talking almost 20 years ago. Since then, he's been what it looks like no problem. There's been no issue with the courts. He hasn't been before the court for any other reason. It's not believed that he's going to try and escape these charges. It's actually that his intention is to fight these charges in court. So it's almost like he would have turned up at a police station and gone, "Can I be charged with this shit so I can actually deal with it?"
Yeah.
So to me, that's the perfect opportunity to do what we used to always do, which was very common, which was arrest by appointment. We would ring somebody who we knew was not going to run away. They're not going to flee and try and escape, try and evade police. This is somebody who is going to appear before the court because they want to present their case. And we would say, that's fine, but we can't give you a notice to appear or a summons or something else. We actually require you to be on conditions. There are bail conditions that we need to impose on you. And as a result, we actually have to take you into custody for a period of time to do the administrational process of the arrest and charging procedure, and then present you to the court and then grant you bail to appear at that time. We would quite often do that by appointment. We would say, turn up at the police station at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, bring whoever you want with you. You are going to be taken into custody, you are going to be charged, and our intention is to grant you bail with these conditions. If you do not appear at that time, that will be seen as not cooperating, and you just become an arrest target, and we will lock you up when we find you. So, to me, you couldn't get a better person to arrest by appointment than Ben Roberts-Smith. Bring your multi-million-dollar legal team with you, but we are taking you into custody. Our intention is to do this. We will have everybody ready. You bring all your people, be completely ready. We will read the charges very clearly to everyone who you want to hear them. We will then take you into custody. Our intention at that time will probably be to present you to the court and allow the court to, if there's any bail application, here's the time. Like, just be completely honest with it. We're going to present you, but this is the bail conditions that we're going to put onto you, or we're going to try. You can take that to the court. We're going to present this side. You present that side. There is no requirement to hide that, because at the end of the day, if they don't comply, you just go, no worries, and you bin him. But to be arrested at Sydney Airport, a person who, to me, and listen, I could be wrong. There may have been, who knows what intel that. I saw something in the news today. He was trying to live elsewhere in the world or whatever else. Okay, no worries. Well, there's extradition processes. Like, the guy is not an active threat to anyone anywhere. To me, it was like we've breached our own general orders almost to show that we're being, the police, as in the Australian Federal Police, have breached their own general orders in order to appear, I don't know, there's a political thing there. That to me is not correct. So I'm really disappointed I didn't mention this last week, and I think it's because we got carried on talking about other things. But, mate, you would have arrested by appointment plenty of times out in the bush.
Mate, all the time. Even some people, if you're busy, we've had people come in and I think I've got a warrant. Yeah, you do. Can you come back at 3 o'clock because, then we'll be free? And yes, they used to come back at 3 o'clock, be arrested. It was also the reason we did it then is usually you can get a magistrate very, very quickly at that time of the day because they're all finishing up their court. So if you need to talk to a magistrate, it means they've got less time in custody.
Yeah.
And, unless if if you arrest them at 10 o'clock in the morning, they might be sitting in the cells for 5 hours.
Yeah, that's right.
Before you can get hold of a magistrate. So that was part of the reason there. And, mate, I honestly, I could not count how many. And I think from memory, I can only remember one where his grandmother brought him down to the Catherine police station and she got him out of the car and he bolted. Yeah. And we soon caught, we caught him. It was a bit about a 10-minute chase, I think. Quite a funny story, really. We caught him, and part of that he got remanded in custody. We weren't going to give him bail because he showed his intentions not to listen to the law.
Cooperate.
So,
yeah.
Yep.
So the whole idea of that was if you can show that because the police don't send you to prison, the police will take you into custody in order to present you before the court. The court may then remand you in custody, and then you appear before the judicial process, and then you get sentenced to imprisonment, and then you're handed over to corrections. You had nothing to do with police. So it's to me, it was you couldn't have got a more cooperative, full. The term is defendant. That's just how it is. So you couldn't have got a more cooperative defendant. The guy goes, right, if you've got allegations against me, shoot me in the face with them and let me deal with it. And it's like, and the police, the only role the police had to do was make that occur. And to me, I don't see why he was arrested. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't violent. It wasn't, none of us were on the plane. I don't understand why he had to be taken off an aircraft. I'm not entirely sure. Look, there may have been intelligence that something was going on, but I don't know that. That's me playing devil's advocate once again. I don't know the circumstances. So, but to me, the guy's in public. It's been very, very, very well publicised that there's something going on in the background. He would have been on no uncertain terms that there's an active investigation involving allegations of war crimes. So to me, it would be, you tell me the second you're happy to roll with this shit, and I will appear at whatever police station you want me to appear at, and we'll get this stuff underway. And they could have just gone, happy days, Mr. Robert Smith, no problem at all. We will let you know, and we want you to be there. Just be aware that if you don't turn up at that time, you become an arrest target. Simple as that. Yep. And it would have been, absolutely, of course I become an arrest target. The guy has apprehended people thousands of times overseas. He understands that you're a target. It's not even it's not personal. It's that the court needs this to occur. The federal police arresting him have no interest whatsoever. They are just the people who carry this role out. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to cover off on that I was a little bit, to me, that should be a point of investigation. What was it that occurred that made the Australian Federal Police hierarchy make the determination that we need to arrest Ben Roberts-Smith right now? Almost, well, it was a surprise to him. So almost tactically, why did we tactically arrest him instead of just going, let's get this legal process underway, which is what we do all the time to people, especially white-collar criminals. It might even be that here are the allegations. We're going to say this, this, this. If you don't come to the police station at this time and organised in advance so we can get legal, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's not, we're not talking about a violent person who's hurting people. We need to talk to you about this. You need to come before the court, blah, blah, blah. We used to do that quite a bit. Don't get me wrong. We used to just skull drag people out of their houses quite a bit too, but this is a completely different case. So anyway, that is my point of question there, and I'm a bit annoyed that we didn't talk about it last week.
Mate, yeah, you're exactly right there. And just before we move on, to touch on it, you arrest, the easiest way you can do it and the most non-violent way is usually the best way. I mean, that's basically general orders.
It's 100% the best way. Yeah.
So, most of the time, I don't know, mate, we did have some very heavy arrests and very violent arrests, but majority of the time, people came willingly. Yep. There wasn't even before we started, we didn't have to handcuff them. That came in later on. A lot of the time, they just come willingly, or you just escort them to the cage, just usually with an arm your hand on the back of their arm, so you could feel pre-attack indicators and all that sort of thing. But majority of the time, it was done, well, I suppose what you would call a soft arrest, or they would come down to the police station and hand themselves in.
Yeah. So, mate, and that's the other thing. A lot of people talk about, big violent arrest, blah, 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 blah. That wasn't success. That was bad. The fact that you'd use, remember the old force philosophy, the use of force philosophy. The success or failure of an operation will be judged primarily to which the use of force is not used or minimized. To what is it?
It's used or minimized.
Used to which force is not used or minimized. So basically, if you had to use force to arrest them, straight away the operation was a failure. That doesn't mean that you don't need to use force. You use force every shift. But the fact was you always tried to minimize it. The police role was to take a person and present them before the court. If that person didn't want to be presented before the court, too bad, sunshine, we are taking you before the court. And if you want to try and start attacking coppers, then we're going to defend ourselves. And the other thing is you're coming with us. Like, you're coming, champ. Like, I'll just get more people. Like, we're going to win. So it's up to you. I'll surround you with tactical people with AR-15s. We're going to win. So we are presenting you before the court. You go to the court and tell them your story. It's nothing to do with us, but we're going to present this and we're going to allege this because we've investigated the offences. And that was all it was. But the absolute, when it comes down to those general orders, that was all to do about arrest is the last resort, about bringing someone before the court.
Yeah, mate, exactly. And before we go on, I'll just tell a story. It was at a guy committed domestic violence against his mother. Anyway, we went out and had a chat to him and said, mate, you need to come down to the station so we can have a chat about this, and I'm going to place you under arrest and all this sort of stuff. And he goes, I don't want to have anything to do with you guys. I said, mate, you don't really have a choice in the matter.
Sorry, Chief.
You're coming down with us whether you're not. And he goes, I don't want to have anything to do. And I said, look, you got two choices. You can resist, and I'll use force, and I'll take you out the car. I'll put you in the cage. I'll drive down to the station. I don't care if you talk to me or not, but you'll be remanded in custody. I'll guarantee it. I said, or you can come willingly, hop in the cage. We'll drive down to the station. If you want to have a chat, you can have a chat. But if you do that, I'll give you police bail. That's what's going to happen. So, and anyway, he goes, I'll come with you. And I thought you'd see it my way.
Yeah.
Because that was minimising the use of force. You give him an option.
Yeah, there is always offer the way out.
Yeah,
mate. Here's how you will be going to court. We're going to allege. The other thing is you are now under arrest. You're in my custody. You're not free to leave.
Yep.
Right. So here's what's going to happen. You come to the back
Yep.
of the cage, jump in, no trouble. Happy days. I'll make you a cup of tea, mate. Like,
Yeah.
happy
That's
days.
oh yeah.
We'll roll
Yeah.
you through the process. You sit in the cells for an hour or so while we do our paperwork. And looking at this, looking at your history, I think you'll be given. I will give you bail. I'm the one determining it, so I'm going to give you bail.
Yep.
You're going to have conditions about that bail. If you disagree with that, you can talk to a magistrate. But I'm going to put this on you. If you resist arrest, blah, 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 I'm going to speak to the magistrate. I'm going to refuse you police bail. And you're probably going to be on an aeroplane out of this tiny little community going to Darwin prison. It's not difficult, eh?
No.
So, and that's that side of it. But I mean, it just relates it back to that. And talking about the
Yeah.
arrest, like,
Yeah.
what that actually means. That people don't sort of, everyone knows what someone getting locked up looks like, but it's not. Yeah, people have no deeper understanding who aren't in the job basically, or aren't lawyers or whatever else. But
No.
yeah, mate,
And
there's
look for
plenty of ways to
everybody.
get people before the court.
Oh yeah, definitely. And look, and many people probably don't see. They probably see more the high-profile arrests or the violent arrests. There'd be thousands every day that are happening that people have no, they wouldn't be aware of.
Mate,
So
there's nothing sexy about a notice to appear.
no.
No. And for those who don't know what that is, basically we can write out what looks like a traffic ticket, and it's just a court date. It's like, here you go, mate. Turn up to court on this date. Your matter's going to be mentioned. Just be aware if you don't appear, you may be subject to a warrant of arrest, warrant of apprehension, and that was it. So yeah,
Yeah.
or a summons. You just deal with something. Look, we'll flick your summons in the mail. You're going to have to go to court for this down the track, but we'll deal with that down there. And anyway, you seek legal advice in the meantime, and we'll flick the summons out to you and go from there. See you
Yep.
later, mate. Have a good night. See you later. And walk away with our 3 ounces of weed or whatever the bloody hell we just taken off them. And yeah, no worries, mate. I'll go to court. I'll see you later. Have a good one. And that was it. That was that. But that ain't sexy. That's not going to make a. Imagine that movie. Yeah. But that's the bulk of policing. So
That's right.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Um, well, mate, you want to move on, and probably
yeah.
actually it's a little bit relevant in some facts. So we've spoken about general orders and this and legislation. So we got a question, and I can't remember who from, but it was a while ago, and I've actually tried to find it, and I can't. So I'm going to do it off the top of my head. It was basically have the government ever brought in legislation in which not us personally, or probably us personally, but the police themselves didn't entirely agree with, and did we choose not to enforce it, or look, this is a very tricky one, but mate, I'll let you start off with it. In legislation, I can't think of anything. However, general orders, yes, I would say. But mate, you want to kick it off?
Yeah. The first thing I'll address there is we just chose not to enforce it. Yeah, no, that doesn't exist. There is separation of powers, and we're not judge, jury, executioner. The elected parliament has gone through an act of parliament and enacted law, and Australia is governed, and the individual states and territories are governed by the rule of law. So when it comes down to do you not enforce them, do you enforce them? Sorry, police officers don't get that option. The law is the law. And you have to be like that. It's very simple for us to turn around, that law's bullshit. Well, I'm sorry. Who empowered you to dismiss what the parliament of the country, who are elected by the people, brought in? And this is controversial because I know at the moment people are screaming blue murder about the government, and other people aren't, and whatever else. That's the whole idea of democracy. It's messy. But the fact is, if the law's been passed and you don't want to enforce it, quit. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. You can't manipulate the law. There is individual discretion when it comes to case by case basis, based in human interaction, and that is very limited. There is very limited, and we're talking real minor offences. There is discretion around very minor offences. I'm talking, you found a bloke pissing at the back of the pub, and you decided not to give him a ticket if he got in the taxi and left. So you've decided to relax the letter of the law in order to maintain public safety. That's fine. I really like this massive multi-millionaire who's defrauding the government. I'm just going to not enforce the law. No, I'm sorry, that's corruption. So no. There is discretion at very, very minor levels where there's no real impact on society, and it's to do with like I just said, public safety at the time, immediate public safety. We're talking extremely minor matters. That's where you can relax or enforce the letter of the law. When it comes to if there's legislation brought in and you don't like it, if you don't like it, quit. This is
Yeah.
where it's hard. I told policing's hard. You've got to do the very unpopular correct thing, and when I say correct, I mean lawful. If the society has voted in a government that brings in legislation, the police don't have the ability to not enforce that. They have to. That's the whole idea. So if you're going to not, if they don't, society collapses. You can't. You kind of can't. If you don't, if you no longer feel like the laws are representing your moral values, then you just have to leave the police force. Simple as that, and go and be a freedom fighter. Like, that's different. Or take up a political party and actually, that's a completely different thing. You can't have an armed force that make up their own rules. It's never worked anywhere. It's just led to genocide. You can't do that. So the idea is there's a separation of powers in this country where we have the parliament that enact laws. We have the executive, which execute the laws as the government of the day. So you think your public service, think your police, your ambulance, all the people who are your government front face. When you see people and they are operating and they are clearly from the government, that is your executive. And then you have the judiciary, which is the courts. And the three have no power over each other. One makes the laws, one adjudicates the laws, and one just carries out the daily role of government. And that has to be that way. It's tried and tested. There's a reason dictatorships are just covered in blood. It's because, righto, you blokes go out and slaughter that prick because I don't agree with him. That's not good. So, yeah, no, police can't just roll up their nose at laws.
No.
I think the second part of that was, has there ever been legislation that we've not liked? And I think you said there's nothing majorly in legislation, and I agree. In general day-to-day living, there wasn't. The legislation was generally pretty good, pretty fair. It's normally debated fairly well. This is in our day. I'm not saying now, but one thing I didn't love was the chief health officer directions that used to flip and flop. Back when I was doing the emergency operations centre stuff in Darwin for COVID, that was a hell of a lot of authority being flipped and flopped really quickly. I used to say that legislation moves like a freight train. You can't slam the brakes on to avoid hitting a kangaroo. You just can't do it. And what was happening was we'd build up all that momentum in one direction with that freight train, and then the next day something had come out and they'd flip it, and the bloody train had to slam it in reverse. And we'd just started to educate the stakeholders who were actually involved in what we're doing, and all of a sudden it was a 180-degree reverse. Whereas normally legislation will be enacted, there'd be a training period, it would be explained and trained out to the people who had to actually deal with this law months before it was actually enforced or became enacted, and then it would become active in Parliament when everyone, or active in law when everyone sort of had their head around it. So there was always that slow-moving aspect to legislation. And by legislation, I mean what the actual government has come up with, that becomes law. But you mentioned general orders, mate, so I'll let you talk about general orders because I've got something to talk about there too.
Yeah, so yeah, mate, exactly right. Just before we leave the legislation, I mean, the legislation there, it's set in bloody writing in the acts, and it is what it is. We don't get to choose what we can enforce and what we can't.
No.
It is just done. Occasionally, if there's a breakout of certain things, they'll ask us to target things more heavily, but you're still complying with the legislation. You have to. That's part of the police officer's job, and you're dead right. If you don't like it, quit, because it's something you have to do. Sometimes you do have to do things that you don't think. Well, I'll give you one. I'll give you one example, just to probably tie it in. This is a guy. Was out at Ramangini, and he was in the council, quite high up. Good bloke. Did everything for police. Really willing to help out. One of those interagency, guys that you could contact, and he'd help you out with council equipment or whatever needed to be done. Really, really good guy. Anyway, his kids were probably a little bit of a bit of riffraff, and there was a bit of infighting amongst his boys. Anyway, after Cyclone Lamb came over, he lost his roof and all that sort of thing, so he had to move into other accommodation, and he was a licensed gun holder. Unfortunately, when he moved, he didn't have a safe, so he just kept the gun either in the closet or under the bed or something like that. And that is against firearm act. So it must be secured, and there's so many requirements. The ammunition has to be in a separate locker, and blah, blah. I won't go into it. But what happened was there was an argument between the sons and the 14-year-old, who was a big boy. He was probably close to 6 foot by that stage. Grabbed the dad's gun and was going to shoot the brother. So we all went down, bulletproof vests, all that sort of thing. Anyway, luckily we got it handed over without any shooting or any violence, in fact, and arrested him and this, that, and the other. Now, the thing I had to charge the dad for having an unsecured firearm.
Yeah.
And I called him down and I said, look, mate, as much as you help us out, this is the law and it's in there for a very good reason. I said the fact that it escalated to the point that my officers were put in danger, and myself, and also the public, that, mate, this is something we have to. We have to enforce it. It has to be enforced. As much as we like you, that's just what has to happen. And I said, you had every option because you knew us really well. You could have just rung me up and said, Schultzy, can I hold it at the police station until I get my accommodation and safely installed or something like that. Easy done. That's not a problem.
Not a worry.
If you've got a friend who's got a firearms license, you can transfer it to them while you get yourself, settled again.
Yep.
So there's always options. And so this is something that, we had to enforce it. One, because it put the public and officers' lives in danger, potential danger. He had to learn that he had other opportunities to actually secure that firearm, and that is part of the requirement when you have a firearms license. So,
Mate, so and on that too, that's why policing's hard. Because it would have been just, mate, sorry about that. I'm sorry, mate. Like, we're mates, yes, but my job, you're now part of my job. I'm sorry. And that's where it takes strength of character. That's why policing's hard.
Yeah.
Because you've got to go, listen, we're mates. Especially in those small communities. I mean, in bigger places, you could probably go, there's a conflict of interest. I can't be involved. He's a mate of mine, blah, blah, blah. Out in those communities, it's like, mate, I'm sorry, but we've now investigated this matter. We've dealt with your son. His offences are separate.
Yeah.
The fact is, where to get the gun? He got the gun off you, and he got the gun off you because you didn't secure your firearm. Mate, I'm a licensed firearm holder. It's... I'm a huge believer in people owning firearms. I've got nothing against it. To me, it's a positive thing. I quite like out in the bush. Everyone's got guns. Rifle clubs are a good thing. There are very strict rules around them because they're extremely dangerous bloody devices. Simple as that. That's pretty cut and dry. That's just, mate, the firearms were unsecured and your son has gone ballistic and grabbed a firearm and threatened people with it, and police turned up tactically, like, sorry.
Yeah.
Job. Here's what occurred, Your Honour. That's what I mean. Even then, we're disinterested. I don't care what the outcome is. What did you find? Well, we found this kid came out with this firearm, so that's that offence. This is this offence. Threatened this person. That's that offence. No worries. How would he get the gun? Well, his dad, who's a licensed firearm owner, had the firearm sitting under the bed. Well, there's that offence. There's this offence. 1 + 2 = 3. Here you are, Your Honour. It's not difficult. Like, it's just terrible.
But, mate, so we'll move on to general orders. General orders did change from time to time, depending on what happened. Mate, I remember some in relation to taking people in custody. It was actually, I don't think it was written in general orders. It was a new, direction. They were giving us a direction in relation to taking people into custody. So usually if people were intoxicated by drug or some other substance, you could take them into custody for their safety and the safety of the public until they're deemed sober and release them. Because of one of the deaths in custody, and I will call it a knee-jerk reaction. Everybody's seen knee-jerk reactions. They quickly brought in that we must take them first to somebody who, a sober person, but that was already in the general orders.
Yeah.
However, if we had deemed they were still going to be a danger to either the public or themselves, or become a victim, we could actually secure them. So the general orders stated that our first stop would automatically be a friend or relative that we could
Yeah.
drop them if you had somebody responsible, willing, and who's sober to look after them. However, there were times when it was a necessity, especially domestic violence was a big one. If there was something about to crack on, and you couldn't, you probably had the belief that they would then go out and actually do something, even if you did take them away. Um, so what happened was they just brought this direction out. I didn't agree with it because if you followed general orders the way it was supposed to be followed, it should be fine. So instead, I actually started arresting people.
Yeah.
Yep, for just social order offences
Mhm.
because I can't remember what act it came under. You actually told me about it,
Yeah.
and you arrest them and you give them a ticket, but they had to be sober to receive the ticket. So
Yeah.
it was just a way of working around what their direction was.
Yeah.
Um,
So what that was, I'll explain it because what it was. This is very Territory specific, but it's still relevant because in the Northern Territory, just given the level of public disorder that was occurring, there was a rule basically that you could apprehend a drunk or intoxicated person for their own safety and the safety of others and take them into custody for a period of no longer than 6 hours or until that period or until that person is no longer considered to be intoxicated. And then we were also found to be experts in intoxication, and that was subject to scrutiny. There was no problem there. It worked. It worked well, but we used to load the cells with drunks. Anyway, that's just how it was. That was life. There was also, and I read deeper into legislation here, and we could apprehend a person and bring them into custody. That was the arrest power, so we could arrest someone, take them into custody. We then had to decide how we were going to deal with them according to law. And no one had trained us in this, but I read it in legislation that we can deal with them in law any way we deem fit. And the thing is, we can hold them for a period, especially when they're intoxicated, until we determine best how they best are going to be dealt with. So it might be that we can't just hold someone, give them a ticket, and release them while they're still drunk because they don't understand the process. So what was happening was we would apprehend a person and then we would take our time to determine that they're sober and can understand what's going on, and then you deal with them according to law. And that could be that you release the person from custody, or you issue an infringement notice for the offence, or you summons the person before the court, or you charge them and bail them, or charge them and remand them to appear before the court. So there were all these actions that we could take at the end. And I read into the legislation and went, "What? Why aren't we locking people up for summary offences, letting them sober up, giving them a ticket? They get a receipt, basically, for their custody. They get their property back and they go home with a fine. Like, what's wrong with that? It's a summary offence. The law supports it." Anyway, what happened down the track was there was, that's right, the power of the arrest, they were saying there was a bit of a bounce back between the fact that in the Northern Territory we could arrest any person for any offence. If a person, we believed on reasonable grounds a person had committed offence, we could arrest the person. That was it. It was a very powerful arrest power. And then from there was the next part that would determine how you deal with them. But what they actually brought in was, I'll never forget, it was called Section 133AB, and it may have changed now, but this is, this is going back a few years. And that was basically apprehension or arrest of a person in order to issue an infringement notice. And that just covered everything I just said, but it made it completely black and white about why we were arresting somebody. And it was considered controversial because there was no custodial sentence attached to the offences that we were actually arresting people for. And we were arguing that, yeah, that's correct. But, I mean, the initial few hours of custody are very much administrational. It's not like you're now serving time in prison. It's like, yeah, you're in custody, but everyone goes, or a hell of a lot of people go into custody in order for something to be worked out. Like, that's just how it is. And it's it has to be. It has to be that police can just grab you because you're carrying on like a pork chop out the front of a pub. Police can just go yoink and you're gone. And that anyone who's arguing is like, go and deal with a bunch of drunks out at the front of a pub at 3 o'clock in the morning and tell me how much reasoning you're going to do with them. Now, listen, gentlemen, this is not a very great way of appearing in public, and I believe that you gentlemen should carry on with your lawful business. No, Get on the ground, dickhead. Clack, clack, bang. Gone. You're out. And they can't understand what you're saying anyway. They're blind drunk. They've been throwing punches. They're all pissed off, whatever else. It was designed for those summary offences where you're removing somebody that's committing offences they're minor offences in the scheme of things, but they are obviously bringing somebody's attention to the fact that they need the police to attend. So when the police attend, they have a tool that they can use to deal with the problem.
Yep.
And that's where that was a really good bit of kit.
And
And
mate, I'll just add in there also, like for anybody that wants to jump up and down about it. Look, part of the fact is we need to discontinue whatever they're doing as well.
Yeah.
And if we believe it's going to continue, then that gives you even greater powers for the arrest, really. And usually it's because they're intoxicated, and they had to be sober to understand the infringement as well.
Yeah.
So it was just for everybody. If you, like you said, out the pub, if you stop someone and give them a ticket and you don't actually take them back to the station, they are still in your custody until you let them go. So
Yes.
that is the term of custody. Is as soon as you're stopped by the police, you're actually in the police's custody.
You're in
Whether
custody.
you're arrested or not is a different matter.
If they're writing you a ticket for 64 in a 60 zone, you are
Yep.
technically in custody. If
Yep.
you are pulled over for the purpose of a roadside breath test, you are in custody. You might be in custody for 10 minutes, except Victoria. I don't think Victoria's the same. I'm not entirely sure. Vicpol, correct me if I'm wrong. Damo, Dugs, get on to me. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
But you in the Northern Territory, 100%. If you're pulled over for the purpose of a roadside breath test, you are in custody. The police have authorised a power. They've apprehended you for the purpose of taking a sample of your breath to determine that you're not over the legal limit of alcohol for driving a motor vehicle. The second they determine you're not, you're released from custody. You might be in custody for 45 seconds, but you're still in custody. If you're in custody at that point, blowing in a straw in a police officer's breathalyzer, and a car slams into you and you die, you're a death in custody.
Yep.
So this is what people don't understand. They go, oh, he wasn't in jail, he wasn't doing this. No, he was under the apprehension. He was under the authority of the police for a certain period of time, and that's where that sort of comes in. But I think we've wandered a bit, but that's probably not a bad yarn. We're just wandering with a yarn, and that's what we're doing. We're not giving evidence here. We're doing a podcast. It's all good.
That's right. Well, and look, at the end of the day, I remember the senior sergeant coming down because, of course, my arrest grew exponentially because I was using the law as it was intended. And anyway, he goes, oh, the arrests are going through. And I said, look, technically, sir, I don't believe with the direction they've given us in relation to taking people in custody in relation to being intoxicated by drug or substance. And I said, if you actually look at the direction and the general orders, they can contradict each other.
Yes, they can. Yep.
And so he thought about it and he had a look at it and he goes, well, you're right. And I said, yeah, well, that's why we're arresting him, because it is actually in a contradiction to your general orders.
Yeah.
So I said, fix it, and there won't be any more arrests. Well, for that, for those.
And that was the discretion of, we're not going to clog the system. We're using our discretion for these very, very minor offences, and we're just dealing with shit to get on the road to deal with more serious shit, and we're dealing with the shit that comes our way. So you got to remember, it's not like we've got one job to do in 12 hours. It's like you're going job to job to job to job to job to job. Like, you got shit flowing, and you just deal with it. And the trouble is, if you just skim over stuff and move on, that can now, what was a drunken 128, it was the old section 128 protective custody, what was just a drunk who could have gone to the cells, is now potentially a high level domestic violence aggravated assault matter. So you got to deal with it. You got to just deal with what comes to you. When you get it, deal with it properly. I would also say apply intelligent law to it, apply the general orders, because the general orders are law. The Commissioner of Police has the authority to issue general orders, and they must be complied with. So no worries, all right, we've got to comply with that. Well, he's drunk, but he just took a piss on the street, so we'll have him for that. I get it completely. You just apply the law where you need to deal with the problem that you're dealing with. And this is where us and lawyers used to clash, because it's like, well, no worries. It's all well and good to sit here and argue the law. Forget arguing. Go and deal with the prick in the middle of the night, belligerent, drunk, carrying on like a dickhead, breaching all kinds of Summary Offences Act laws. Go and tell him that he's breaching the Summary Offences Act. Go on. Just walk up and tell him. He'll punch you in the head. Then he's breaching the Criminal Code Act. What do you want to tell him that too? No. So, it was that. It was the practical application of legislation. And what I think what we need to do is differentiate between the fact that legislation is what the Parliament has come up with, that is the law. General orders are what have been developed and then signed off by the Commissioner of Police about how police are to do their job in relation to the law. So that's the difference there. But yeah, general orders are enforceable by law. They must be complied with. So yeah, she's a hard job. It's a hard job, Schultzy.
It is, mate. And look, in general orders, I used to always sit there. The problem, general orders, and look, on the whole, they were good. However, there were times, the problem is general orders a lot of the time, I don't think I wouldn't say they're as well thought out as legislation. There's probably a lot more people checking the legislation. But when it comes to general orders, there's a lot of times it was written about a specific incident. So, and it's because this incident happened, they're brought in this general order.
Yeah.
However, you can go to a similar incident, but it's not the same. And that general order becomes very vague.
Yes.
And this is that there's times when they at once they actually tried to get me for breaching one general order, and I contradicted them with legislation. And I didn't get in trouble. But it's mate. Do you want to talk about that a bit more? Because it's always general orders were written usually about a specific incident, and the problem is if it goes outside that parameters, the general orders become very sketchy.
Yeah, this is where, love him or loathe him. I didn't have a problem with him. Former Commissioner Reece Kershaw came out and said, I wanted more generalised general orders. Who am I to dictate exactly how you're going to do your job? I want experienced police officers who know the legislation, know general orders. I want them to be able to apply whatever powers they need in order to fix a problem. We're not talking about murders. We're not talking about gunshots, shit. That's to me, those really simple offences those really serious offences are quite simple. It's just that on the ground dealing with shit, to me, I agreed with him. I said, general orders, he goes, I want them to be more generalised. I want to give you a ballpark and then you apply what you need to apply. You must act lawfully. You must act within general orders. But if I make my general orders so specific that you can't do your job, then that's ridiculous. And I think that's where this probably means nothing to civilians. This would mean a lot to police. So police officers, and it would mean a lot to the military. The military have little rules and general orders. They have general orders. There are general orders in the military. So it would apply to those guys. In civilian world, think about policies and procedures, standard operating procedures within companies, within, whatever, at your workplace. If you work at a mine site, there are standard operating procedures. If you go outside those standard operating procedures, you can be sacked. So it's not that you're breaking the law, it's that you're just breaching your company's rules. Well, our company's rules were law. If we breach them, we become subject to the Police Administration Act disciplinary process. So there was quite a bit to that. But I think that's where we relate that back. But the thing was, like you just said rightly before, was that legislation was generally kept pretty vague, and that's fine because here's the law, here's what it is, but that's an act of Parliament. How the police deal with that is up to the command and control of the police force as to how we're going to practically deal with that legislation and deal with those offences. And that's where those general orders could get a bit tricky. But I don't want to get bogged too completely in those weeds. I think the biggest thing is here that you cannot beat experience. You couldn't beat the old salty senior constable on the ground who just knew how to deal with shit. They knew the law, they knew the legislation. They had their bottom smacked for breaching general orders before when they were, 5 years ago when they were a first-class constable. So they know that. You can't do that. We've got to do this. They also have been around so long, dealing with legislation for so long, been to court so many times, that just in court giving evidence, that they understand how the judiciary applies this law. So they've got all this experience. Not just that, they've been punched, bitten, spat on, fucking yelled at, screamed at, been in pursuits. They're just salty. They know how to do their job. And they were just gods. They were gods on the street because as a sergeant especially, if I knew I had a salty old senior constable on the ground, I knew that they could apply all that. They would show the young guys how to do their job. And it all came down to just knowing that you had a good person on the ground. So I think it all comes back to we're humans. If we were robots, computer programming is easy because it's just here as it is, but everything behaves exactly how it should. Humans don't. That's why there's a police force.
Yeah.
You need humans to enforce those laws, and that's my rant on that. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah, mate. Yeah. So I mean, look, so that's the general orders, and look, there's a whole heap of them. Look, honestly, nobody would know all of them. Like on the back of their hand.
no, oh
However,
God, no,
but that's where you talk about experience because, like you said, you've been through it 100 times. You learn when you're on the road. One of the things is we've got 100 new police out on the beat. Well, 100 new police that have just walked out of the college. They're
that's
not.
bad.
They're not. Yeah. Yes, they've got the powers to do this stuff,
Mm,
but the knowledge still isn't there.
yeah,
Um, so before they become effective, it takes a lot of learning
oh
because
yeah,
there's a lot to learn. What you consider we learn in 6 months is it's a minor part.
mate.
Um, you, you know,
You haven't started your apprenticeship until you graduate the college. So, and we've spoken about that before. But yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
Well,
mate,
mate,
but
a bit of a recap. I don't think we have to squawk on too much, but a bit of a
no,
recap. Like I think the idea here was we wanted to cover off the fact that I'm just annoyed that we didn't cover that talking about the arrest of Ben Robert Smith in the last one. Like, why did they arrest him? And the answer to me would be unless there was some information that he was leaving the country never to return, and therefore they had to bring him before the Australian courts. To me, there are plenty of ways to get a person before the court that don't involve arrest. I haven't heard of Ben Robert Smith rolling down the streets of Sydney shooting anybody like other people have. However, I get it. I understand that you've got to bring the person before the court, but there are other ways to deal with that. And I think what we did there was to flow on and just talk about legislation and how we don't get a choice in enforcing legislation. Just clarifying that what police discretion is, and just how minimal that is. Like we're talking a very small component at the very pointy end of policing that there is discretion. But when it comes to enforcing offences, there is no discretion. The offence is committed, and you gave a good example of that. And then I think we've also just covered that general orders and legislation and the difference there, and kind of relating it to SOPs out in the real world. And yeah, so I don't know, mate. What's your recap?
yeah, mate. I mean, I completely agree. It's just, yeah, I did have something I was going to say, but I've completely lost it as I
Sorry, mate,
do.
I ranted again.
That's all right. But no, look, yeah, mate, that's basically the recap. You can't go into it too much because there's just it's so complex. It's
Yeah,
like everything to do with the police, general orders, legislation. It is so complex, and mate, we could talk legislation for years, really, with what we
yep.
learned
And
on
we
the
put
road.
everyone asleep. Everyone to go to sleep listening. So yeah,
They
there's no
would, yeah,
point.
exactly. However, like to us, I know a lot of it. Reading the legislation became very interesting when you're dealing with people that have broken that legislation.
Yeah,
Um, so, yeah, and when talking about, yeah, that's right, that's what I was going to say. Talking about discretion, you always, even the courts relate to a similar person, a reasonable person similarly circumstanced.
yeah,
And is it in the best interest of the community to proceed with what you're going to proceed with?
yeah.
So that's where discretion probably really plays a part. You've got to consider what the community, what the law, and what the courts use their discretion as well a lot of the time. So and that's usually what it comes down to. A reasonable person similarly circumstanced, how would their behaviour
And
go?
I'll give you a 3 minute example of a very extreme end. It wasn't discretion; it was a deliberate decision made by the investigating members, and then put to the DPP for an opinion, and the opinion came back to agree with us. When we were talking to Andy Bedwell, we spoke about a young girl who got run over by her dad. Dad reversed over her in the driveway of in Catherine in 2011 or 10 or something like that. He was never charged with that offence. The offence would have been drive motor vehicle cause death. He was never charged with that. He'd run over his 18-month-old daughter. His life's done. He was a destroyed shell of a human being. We decided that it was not in the public interest to prosecute him, and the DPP agreed, and as a result, that was put through to the coronial investigation, and the coroner agreed with our decision. So that is an extreme example of discretion. That wasn't discretion. There wasn't a single copper who just went, we're not going to charge the poor bastard. That was a very thorough legal process about saying, we're not charging this dude. He is in counselling every day. He is suicidal about the fact he killed his own daughter. Like, what the hell is putting him in prison going to do?
Yeah.
He is serving life imprisonment now in his own brain. So there is no purpose in prosecuting it. But there was no individual police. Detective Senior Constable Damien Barr didn't get to make that call. That went a lot higher than me. But we all had our input. We said, I'm not charging this bloke. There's no fucking way.
Yeah.
The guy did not deliberately do that. That was a terrible, terrible accident. However, if you go by the letter of the law, he committed the offence of drive motor vehicle caused death.
Yeah.
And that's where we dealt with that. But anyway, that's an example of that other end of it, the public interest stuff.
Yep, mate. Yeah, that's a fantastic example. Yeah. So, and look, we've got a few others, but we won't bore everybody with
No,
it.
no. I think that'll do us. That's that's good to cover that, just to sort of talk about why we're a bit pissed off about the arrest. People go, well, you had to get arrested. It's like, no, he didn't. Well, yeah, okay, he might have been. He needed to get arrested, but where, when?
Yeah.
Like, let's do it in business hours where we've got shit. But there's nothing to hide. You're going to court, mate. Like, we want you to go to court. You come and talk to us. Our bail conditions are going to be this, or we're not giving you bail. You're going to jail. However, if you don't come and talk to us, you become a wanted man, and then it's completely on our terms. And I think that's our point there.
Yeah, definitely. Mate, I reckon that'll probably just about do us. What do you reckon?
Oh, that'll do us, mate. God, yeah. Good rant. Don't get me ranting. Yeah.
Yeah, so look, and look, keep your questions coming in. There's a lot that's come out of the Brendan Robert Smith, and there's a lot that the problem is we just don't know the details. So we're not going to go into it. And even if we did know the details, we still wouldn't go into it because that would then probably be perverting the course of justice.
Well, if we knew the details, we would not be allowed to talk about them. And
that's exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is, like I've mentioned before, media have to be very careful about the way they influence the public because it can railroad the impartial way the courts work. So, but yeah, mate, I reckon that'll just about do us. Have you got anything else for us?
No.
Alrighty, everybody. We'll see you next week. We do have something exciting coming up, but you just have to wait and see. You'll probably see it in a couple of weeks, so you'll hear about it then. That's for sure. So yeah, stay on the socials and keep the questions coming in, and also we've got some other ideas that have been passed on to us, which I think will be quite entertaining as well. So yeah, all right, that's us signing off.
And let us know what you want as well. Sorry, that's a good point there. If you want to hear something, let us know.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Because we can and will talk.
We will.
Alrighty, everyone. We'll see you next week.